How many times have you seen someone amass a huge board state full of crazy powerful creatures or maybe a large number of creatures, and then they pass the turn all bright-eyed and cheery, and then all the light fades from their eyes as a board wipe is cast, and they proceed to lose the game? Maybe this has even happened to you. And there are a ton of ways to get around this. Many players will use counter magic, protection spells, or mass reanimation to help avoid board wipes. But one really underrated and powerful way to avoid removal is haste. Why wait a full turn cycle for everybody to untap and draw before you attack or use your activated abilities? There are a ton of excellent haste enablers in the game, and I want to talk about some of them here. So this month on Better Than a Booster, I'm going to show you 10 haste enablers you can buy instead of gambling on a pack. Right now, Aether Drift is going for $375, so every card on this list will cost less than that. Additionally, I'm skipping Lightning Greaves, Swiftfoot Boots. I mean, you know what these cards are. And if you want to pick up any of the cards I talk about today, consider going to Cool Stuff Inc. If you use my code TTM, you get 5% off, and it supports the channel. Thanks to Cool Stuff Inc. for sponsoring the video. Normally, I wouldn't recommend playing creatures with Defender in an aggressive deck, but Tuk Tuk Rubble Fort is an exception. 2 and a red for an 0/3 Defender Reach Wall, and creatures you control have haste. It is kind of funny that this gives itself haste. At 3 mana, it's a pretty excellent haste enabler. I mean, that's cheap enough you could get it down early and set up for your commander's tap ability. Additionally, it's also cheap enough that late game you could cast a 3 or 4 drop and give it haste in the same turn. The card is also very cheap, so pick one up if you want to try this out. Crashing Drawbridge is another wall that gives haste. 2 mana for an 0/4 with Defender, and it has tap. Creatures you control gain haste until end of turn. This does have the downside of needing to tap to give haste, but being 2 mana is phenomenally cheap. Its mana cost is so low, and in colorless, you can play this in any deck. Your Selesnya Tokens deck now could have a way to give your whole team haste. There aren't too many other colorless options like this, and although these cards are in no particular order, this might be the best one on the entire list. But please don't skip the rest of the video. I got a couple other fun haste enablers, like Through the Breach. This card was the bane of Modern for quite a while, and after many reprints has tanked in price. It's a 5-mana instant Arcane, which is usually not relevant, that has Splice into Arcane, again, not very relevant, but you can put a creature card from your hand onto the battlefield, it gains haste, and you sack it at the beginning of the next end step. The options here are limitless. You could put a huge creature in play like Blightsteel and just delete a player. You can use this to cheat out enter the battlefield effects, and don't forget that you sacrifice the creature, which is really important because if it exiled, you wouldn't get death triggers. So this could be a great way to put a Worm Coil engine in play, and then you sacrifice it and you actually get to keep the tokens. This card sees very little commander play, and honestly, it's pretty damn good. If you want to be sacrificing your big things anyway, like to a greater good or a Life's Legacy, then this is an awesome card to include in your deck. Not only letting you cheat out the big things, but you get haste as well. It's pretty strong. I would recommend it in a lot of Gruul, Rakdos, Jund type decks. Next is Audric Lunarch Marshal. White and 3 for a 3/3 human soldier. At the beginning of each combat, creatures you control gain first strike until end of turn. If a creature you control has first strike, same for a bunch of other keywords. Notably, haste, meaning if you have one creature with haste, you can give your whole team haste, which is pretty good. And there's a couple fun things to note here. One, it is each combat. So a lot of times people might forget, but if you have a first strike creature or an indestructible creature, it's not just indestructible during your turn, it's during everyone's combat. And second, you can play Audric with the card Hall of the Bandit Lord, a really weird legendary land from Kamigawa. Comes into play tapped, you pay 3 life, it gives you a colorless. But if you spend that on a creature, the creature has haste. Notably, Hall of the Bandit Lord does not say until end of turn, meaning you permanently have given a creature haste. So, if you play Hall of the Bandit Lord in your Audric deck and give something haste, every single turn, Audric will give your whole team haste. So all your new creatures will just be hasty. It's a cute way to have a constant haste enabler in mono white. Need for Speed is a video game I was never very good at, but it is also an enchantment. For 1 red, it lets you sacrifice a land, target creature gains haste until end of turn. So this is excellent if you really just want to give one creature haste one time, or if you're going to alpha strike, you can sacrifice 5 lands and give 5 creatures haste and go for the win. I think it's also really fun if you're playing a Jund lands deck where you want to be sacrificing your lands. Maybe you play the Gitrog monster in this list, maybe you're playing Korvald or Windgrace as the commander, and you want lands to be going in and out of the graveyard. It's just a neat haste enabler for 1 mana. Additionally, it says target creature gains haste, which means you can use this as a political tool. If an opponent plays a large creature, you can offer to them, hey, I'll sacrifice my land to give your creature haste as long as you attack someone else. And then suddenly that big scary threat is swinging at somebody else, which can be a huge benefit for you. It's about $2 because it only has 1 printing, but honestly, worth it in the right deck. Now, of course, when I'm talking about haste enablers, I have to mention Break Through the Line, one of my all-time favorite Magic cards. Red and 1 for an enchantment. You can pay a red, target creature with power 2 or less gains haste until end of turn, and can't be blocked. This is very good in a lot of decks. The ability to give your weenies haste is really great with Arabella Abandoned Doll, or if you're a Ragavan deck. I played it in my Grenzo list, and there are a lot of dangerous low power creatures that you can use to get some crazy effects. Oran Frostfang lets you draw cards, Stigma Lasher lets you permanently shut off life gain, Trigon Predator lets you destroy artifacts or enchantments, Delaney Streetwise Lookout will let you double up a lot of these triggers. There's so much utility to this card. You can play it in a morph/cloak deck since all of your face down cards are 2/2s. You can play this in a deck that makes token copies of things like the Jolly Balloon Man, giving you unblockable 1/1 versions of whatever you need. And for like a 25-cent card, it's worth playing in a lot of lists. Give your deck a check and you might find that you want to Break Through the Line. Another card that I don't see too much of is Winged Hive Tyrant. 3 blue-red for a 4/4 Tyrannid with flying and haste. Other creatures you control with counters on them have flying and haste. This card is really interesting. 1, it gives your whole team flying, so if you play it later in the game, it's kind of like a, not anthem, but a pseudo unblockable effect on all your dudes that have counters. But if you play it earlier in the game, when you play a random creature that enters with a counter, it suddenly has flying and haste. And I love that it doesn't say +1/+1 counters. So, yes, of course, you could play the new Market Back Walker and make it huge, but also creatures with -1/-1 counters, charge counters, death touch counters, anything like that also then gains haste. I know Winged Hive Tyrant is a 5-drop, which makes it maybe a little slower than a lot of these other options, but I think its ability to give your whole team flying as a pseudo finisher and a +1/+1 counter deck does give it a little bit of extra utility beyond being just a haste enabler. It's also less than $1, so it's worth a try at least. Surok the Hunt Caller is a 4-mana 5/4 legendary creature with Formidable. At the beginning of combat on your turn, if creatures you control have total power 8 or greater, target creature you control gains haste until end of turn. This card's great. So it already is a 5/4, meaning you only need 3 power of other creatures to start giving haste, which means it's basically free haste every combat. If you want to give your commander haste or just another big creature haste, this is a pretty great option. It's also in Foundation, so you might have already cracked one from a pack, and it's super, super cheap. Additionally, a haste enabler like this every turn in mono green isn't super common, so this is a great way for non-red decks to be able to give haste to a big creature. Next card I want to talk about is Mass Hysteria. 1 red for an enchantment, all creatures have haste. So this does have the downside of giving your opponent's creatures haste. Ideally, you play this in a list where you can get much more benefit from that. This card has been around for a hot minute, but it's always been kind of on the expensive side until Innistrad Remastered, which has nuked the price. You can get one for about $1 now. I know it is just a red Concordant Crossroads, but Concordant Crossroads is still pretty pricey when you look at it. So if you're in red and green and you want a budget version of Crossroads, Mass Hysteria is a pretty good option. Last card I want to talk about this month is Torch Courier. 1 red for a 1/1 goblin with haste that says sacrifice this creature. Another target creature gains haste until end of turn. This card's really simple, it's really elegant, and it's really great. As opposed to a lot of the other instants and sorceries that give a creature haste and draw a card, this one does that on a dude. Now, any of these other cantrippy spells could have made this list, but Torch Courier is interesting because it's 1 mana on a creature. So it works with all your Beast Whisperer synergies or any other creature synergies you might have. And considering you're giving haste to a creature, you probably have some creature synergies of some kind, which I think makes it better than these instants and sorceries in at least a decent amount of decks. Now, of course, I left off a dozen other great haste enablers. So if you have any other favorites, especially budget ones, let me know in the comments below. Thank you so very much for watching this video. If you enjoy my Better Than a Booster series, I make one of these every month. You can subscribe and stick around and see the next one. Also, there's a playlist to all the other ones on my channel. I'll put a card to it here. Thank you so very much to my patrons for making this video possible. I really appreciate all of the support.